Hello and welcome to Hardtalk India. My guest today is in the forefront of the fight against communalism in India. It's made her famous, but it's also made her a figure of controversy. How did it start? And more importantly, how does she answer her critics? Here to answer those questions is the editor of Communal Combat, Teesta Setalvad. Teesta, it's been 18 years, I gather, since you first took up cudgels against communalism. How did you get involved in this battle?
18 years since we did it informally and 12 years since we started formally Communalism Combat. I think it's two of us really. A lot of my work is connected to my colleague and husband Javed. Was the realization that, with all the other work we were doing in the labor sector, gender sector, the cutting edge came from this issue. And unfortunately, we've been proved right.
So in a sense, it was a motivation and almost a driving force that pushed you in this direction.
Yeah, from the 86 onwards, you saw this country being completely polarized by two incidents. One was the opening of the locks of the Babri Masjid. The other was a terrible mobilization by the Muslim male community on the Shah Banu issue. Two facets of the same coin, Hindu communalism and Muslim communalism. And you saw every sphere of social life and political life being polarized by it.
The interesting thing is in those very early days, I believe in the late 80s and perhaps even in the very, very early 90s, one of your colleagues was a gentleman called Sudhindra Kulkarni, today a senior member of Mr. Vajpayee's Prime Ministerial Secretariat.
Sudhindra and I, in fact, were co-signatories on the checkbook of Sabrang, when Sabrang was an informal entity of three journalists, Javed, Sudhin and myself, who just wanted to mobilize journalists against the politics of hatred and hate writing. And Sudhin was very much part of us then, till he thought otherwise and crossed over to the other side.
Now, you said, in fact, that you began informally 18 years ago, but formally 12. Was the formal beginning the launch of your monthly magazine, Communal Combat?
That's right. It was Bombay 92, 93 that really made us leave our jobs in mainstream journalism and look for an alternate space, because we felt that we were quite highly placed in mainstream journalism. Javed was in Sunday Observer, me in Business India. But we felt frustrated that we couldn't follow the politics of communalism, the process and the fallout.
Because the press wouldn't let you, or because they weren't interested in the details that you wanted to go into?
I think it's the details. I think it's the way the mainstream press, of which all of us have been a part, looks at issues. You look for a sensation, a headline, a Kausar Banu, a Zaira Sheikh, a tragedy.
Rather than the
making of the tragedy or the fallout, the processes at work, what can be done to avert such tragedies in future. That's what we were concerned with.
And your aim, therefore, was to focus attention on communalism, its manifestations, and also how it should be tackled by the state.
That's right. To develop an understanding of it theoretically, from an activist point of view, for an activist on the ground, to focus on those everyday peacemakers who stake their lives in the struggle. We've always focused on good news
and
as well.
And get them the attention that they deserve.
Which sometimes the media does, but sometimes forgets to do.
Let's then for a moment pause and talk a bit about the nature of communalism. How would you define it? Would you see it narrowly in religious terms, or would you try and place it in a broader context?
No, I think there's absolutely no confusion among many of us who are in this battle, that, to be anti-communal in the anti-communal movement is not to be against any religion. It's the political manifestation of religion, of all religions, whether it's Christianity, Islam or Hinduism, that we are against. And it's the use for political mobilization. And unfortunately, this subcontinent has seen that from the 1860s onwards.
So would you draw a distinction between communal conflict and caste conflict, or would you subsume the latter in the former?
No, I think that in India, and to do with Hindu communalism, you cannot fight Hindu communalism without understanding caste. And that's where our progressive secular liberals have failed, because very, very avidly they fight the Hindu-Muslim peace struggle, they stand up for it, but they don't speak up for the issue of anti-Dalit violence. And I think that comes from a theoretical misunderstanding of what organized Hindu religion can do, the cruelties of organized Hindu religion. I think Hindu religion has two sides to it. One side is very eclectic, very attractive, which has been absorbed many traditions over thousands of years, and the other side is very oppressive.
But the interesting thing is you keep talking about communalism in terms of organized Hindu religion. What about organized Islamic religion? Is that not also a source of communalism?
Of course it is, and in fact that's why I mentioned that, the partition of the subcontinent. But Communalism Combat has always stood against minority communalism as well. We are the ones who invited Taslima Nasreen to Bombay. We wrote a cover story on the Taliban long before TV channels focused on the Bamia and Buddha.
So there's no distinction in your eyes between majority communalism and minority communalism?
Not only that, I feel that secularists, whether they're Hindu or Muslim, should speak against both communalism. There's a tendency among the progressive liberals that only if you're a Hindu would you speak against Hindu communalism, and only if you're a Muslim would you speak against
So there's a sense of side-taking taking place, and you want to do away with that.
And this needs to be broken. And
in which case, As you look at communalism in India, who or what is responsible for its cantankerous and cankerous spread? Is it in fact politics and politicians? Is it socio-religious groups? Or is there a real sense in which, as some people say, it is genuinely spontaneous?
I think the fact that we have been within our existence political groups with a certain ideology which wants the Indian nation state to be majoritarian is the primary factor. There I would put the RSS, VHP, Bajrangal.
So the primary factor are those
mainly,
associated with the Hindu faith?
No, in India.
In India.
If I was in Pakistan, I would be saying that it is the jihadis, it is the Talibanis who are responsible for the Islamization of Pakistan. So if Karan Thapa were doing this interview with me in Pakistan, and I was involved in the same business as I'm sure I would be fighting for the rights of those Hindus who've been forced to leave that country. But if I'm concerned about democracy in my country, and the fact that this particular virus, according to me, is eating into the democratic foundations of our very structure, and one day it's going to hit us hard. I mean, you have...
But then would you go as far as Pandit Nehru did to say that, in fact, because majority communalism is the virus that I have to fight against, I won't see minority communalism as an equal?
No,
as
there
bad?
I would beg to disagree with due respect to this esteemed leader, that I feel there was a misunderstanding. He spoke from a certain generational point of view, the apology of the tragedy of partition, Mahatma Gandhi's assassination. I think that in criticism and fight, we must unequivocally fight against both. But if I'm located in Bangladesh, undoubtedly my voice would be risen much more against a Muslim fundamentalist. If I'm fighting in India, obviously Togadia would figure more than Imam Bukhari. But whenever Imam Bukhari has spoken, so have we. When Pandits have been displaced from the Kashmir Valley, we have raised a voice and written cover stories on it. But the question is, Communism Combat is an Indian publication. It's not a Pakistani or
and
Bangladeshi.
So it has to speak within the Indian context.
That's right. Which majority communalism is in a way a danger. It's not in a way, it's actually a danger to Indian democracy.
But then
minority communalism pushes more Hindus to become communal.
it's interesting that
So
you
it's a
should say that
collaborative
it's
process.
actually a danger to Indian democracy. Faced with this danger, and as you've seen it over the last 18 years, how has the Indian state responded to it?
Unfortunately, not as well and as resiliently as one hoped. One still has hopes left, which is why one is in the Supreme Court, which is why one is here. One can speak freely or semi-freely. But I think the fact, I mean, with a lot of reservation and conscious of the language I use, I'd also use the judiciary very, very responsible for this, because it's very easy to criticize
The
politics.
judiciary is responsible for failing to tackle it effectively. Is that what you're saying?
Is one of the institutions as responsible as the police force and politicians in not issuing suo motu orders on the issue of communal politics and hate speech as it does on, say, on environment, on other issues.
About the police, it's often been said that they're lax because they're either ineffective or perhaps they're downright partisan. What's the explanation for the judiciary not being as forthright as you would like it to be?
You see, this is when we talk about the agents and the institutions of democracy bending to political waves and political movements.
You mean the judiciary has bent to political
It has
waves?
not bent. It has not bent. But there is always a tendency all over the world. It's happened in Pakistan. It's happened in Bangladesh. It happened in Germany. That when you see an extremely aggressive, violent force and no force of the state is tackling it, the police is not tackling it, the executive is letting it go scot-free, and the kind of statements that are made and published by our newspapers, by some leaders, and they are not even
But
asked.
come back to the judiciary, because the belief in India today is that the judiciary is one of the bulwarks that stands up for justice, particularly in the face of communally oriented police forces and sometimes even communally oriented state governments. You're saying something very different.
No, I'm saying that along with the executive and the police, the judiciary, because it is our last bulwark, tends to get softer treatment from us. It ought to, because it's the only
So
hope
we need
left.
to be more vigilant?
Yes. And I think our judges need to realize the great responsibility and hopes that victims have on them.
Because they are the last
Yeah,
resort.
because they are the last resort. I have hopes there, that is why we are in the Supreme Court. But I was in Gujarat just 3 days ago, and there was a victim from Pandarwada, which was one of the situations of 42 people being massacred in a village. And the acquittal happened last October. Gujarat government has not filed an appeal. And I was recording the affidavit of one of the eyewitnesses. And you know what she told me? She said, yeah, I've recorded this affidavit. Now the accused will get arrested, right?
In other words, she had
Such
hope,
an innocent
but you
hope.
were scared that that hope would be belied.
Yeah, and that I would be an agent in destroying that hope as well by raising it in the first place.
The Supreme Court, of course, has stepped in valiantly in the case of the Gujarat cases that came from the riots that happened in 2002. Do you believe that the Supreme Court will be able to secure justice for the victims of the Best Bakery case and, say, the Bilkis rape case, just to take those two?
I think the law says it can. I think the facts are on our side. I think there's
But what about
enough
the outcome?
evidence.
Because that's all theoretical. What will
I'm
the
not the
end
judge.
be?
I'm not the judge.
But
And
are you
I am the petitioner, so I can't say beyond this.
But
All
are
I
you
can say is
confident?
that there is, according to me, still a lot of hope in us, that there is enough law and facts on our side for us to emerge victorious.
But the
Beyond
reason-
that, it's up to the judge.
The reason I ask is that in the Best Bakery case, the Gujarat High Court has turned down the appeal of the Gujarat state government against the acquittal of the original accused. Now that means two courts, the lower court and the High Court, have acquitted the accused. Are we not getting very close to the end of the road for justice?
Karan, when we approached the Supreme Court rather than the Gujarat High Court in the Zaira Sheikh case, we did it because of certain reasons. I won't say anything more.
Well, what were they?
It was very clearly we felt that this case was a fit case to get outside Gujarat.
And you
that has
also
been our
believe-
plea, that our plea was that this retrial must be outside Gujarat. I can't say anything more because I'm a petitioner, but I think that what I'm saying is quite obvious.
Quite right. And you also did believe that the Supreme Court would understand and be sympathetic and find in your favor. Otherwise, you would not have appealed to them.
Absolutely. And I think that it is the Best Bakery case is still pending before the Supreme Court. It will come up on the 30th.
And
It's not a closed situation.
So there is still hope
Yes, there is
that the
hope.
decisions taken by two lower courts could be overturned by the Supreme Court in the pursuit of justice.
Certainly.
Now, in one of your articles, you write, and I want to quote to you, you say, human beings need to believe in and find justice for unspeakable crimes before peace and reconciliation can be effected. In other words, closure comes with justice. How can we in India ensure speedier and better justice for riot victims?
One is by having speedier trials. One is by having...
And that's the court that has to act there.
The court has to act there. There the judiciary is responsible. An average civil suit takes 25 years. A criminal trial takes 10 years. You lose all your evidence by then.
And
So
the others,
time-bound.
what are the others?
The other thing is you must have a committed and independent investigative agency.
Now that's something you've talked about. You're talking here about the independent police force that you've written about. Why would that make such a difference?
Since the 80s, senior members of our police force, not me, have been articulating the need, given their experience of being on the firing line during riots, that the police force behaves in a partisan way. And they are saying unless the police force is given an independent structure, independent of the executive, it will not follow the constitution as it's bound to do.
Where does the fault lie? Is it in the personnel and their recruitment? Is it in their training? Or is it in fact in the political control they come under?
It's the latter first, but all three.
In which case, aren't you really pointing the finger at politicians and the political class as a whole?
No political class, not even the left in this country, wants to leave control of the police.
So in fact, will you get justice for riot victims until the attitudes of politicians who determine everything changes?
No, because the transfer, the hire and fire of the policeman, particularly the good policeman who does his duty when violence happens, is in the hand of the politician. So our desire is to raise this debate on independent police force because it affects not just riot victims, but Dalit victims, and even in the Telgi scam eventually.
So speedier justice, faster trials, an independent police force. Is there a third or a fourth that you need to ensure justice?
I think we also need to have debate, honest debate at the social level. Not acrimonious debate, but honest debate.
India has a lot of reportage of communal violence. When you say honest debate, what more are you asking for?
I feel that the forces we are up against, when I talk about communal forces, they have a lot of money. A lot of it is NRI money. There's a lot of propaganda machinery, and they believe in the dictum of repeat a lie 100 times until it becomes the truth.
So you're saying expose the actual factors that are involved.
Now, how does
And
Amina
expose
or
their
Shahbanu
funding.
become a headline, and how does hundreds of female fetuses destroyed remain a statistic? Is it because that's a Hindu crime and one is a Muslim crime? So we need to expose the fact that how we treat our women, irrespective of community.
And you're scared that at the moment society and perhaps the press in particular are shying away from the full exposure needed,
Yeah.
from the open debate.
And the media sometimes falls in line, not always.
So sometimes the media, perhaps even unwillingly and unwittingly, becomes an accomplice.
Repeats the stereotype without examining it. Not necessarily in a partisan way, but unthinkingly.
One of the criticisms that's made about your very forthright, open and outspoken approach is that people say in your fight against communalism, you sometimes end up taking sides against the BJP and perhaps the Sangh Parivar as a whole. Is taking sides essential?
If there's a particular political party that represents a political ideology.
You mean the BJP, don't you?
Yes, which in this case the BJP, it could be the Jamaat-e-Islami and the Lashkar-e-Toiba, because I remember a statement made by the Lashkar-e-Toiba chief in Pakistan who said that, you know, it's in the interest of Lashkar-e-Toiba to have a BJP government in power in India. And that's what I mean. The idea, we have also said repeatedly in Communalism Combat, when we talk about the Sikh widows of 1984, that the Congress also moved to a majoritarian direction from the 80s onwards.
You see, let me pick up one of the things that you said about the BJP that rankles with people who otherwise would be great supporters of yours. In a press release that your organization issued on December the 8th, you wrote of the Sangh Parivar's utter hatred for a multi-religious socio-cultural space. Was that really a fair comment?
I think it is, because if they believe that, you know, the only way minorities can live in this country is as second-class citizen, it militates against everything that India has stood for. The good things India has stood for, the great things India has stood for.
What about the fact that many people believe that the BJP and the Sangh Parivar as a whole criticism of what is today called pseudo-secularism, which is another way of describing the alleged anti-Hindu secular hardline of the Nehruvian era, that this critique is not just justified, but it's an important correction?
I don't think so, because, can I ask you a question back? Why was it necessary for Praveen Togadia to lash out at a small fry like Teesta Setalvad simply because Hindu Godhra victims approached our organization in the struggle for justice?
But should you judge the whole Sangh Parivar, leave aside the BJP, with Praveen Togadia as your criteria?
Our basic problem with the BJP and the Sangh Parivar is that they do not speak for Hindus. They have appropriated themselves this mantle. But I feel that the Hindus have been terrorized into silence. The greatness of this country lies in the fact that they do not speak for all Hindus. And there will come a time when Hindus will say this openly. More and more Hindus will say this.
No one can deny that the BJP doesn't speak for all Hindus, but the BJP and the Sangh Parivar have created a new attitude and thinking about what secularism should be. And that is something that people increasingly in the last 15 years have come to accept. And when you criticize them, you seem to be out of step with that new thinking.
No, I don't think so. I think what they've tried to do is to debunk their notion of Nehruvian secularism and actually take away from what really secularism is about, which is equality to all and non-discrimination to none. And I think if the BJP and the RSS were to come out openly and say that we are for non-discrimination to Muslims, Hindus, Christians, Dalits, all alike, and recover the lost ground of their own politics, I think you will find people being much more open to
So when
them.
they turn around and say that, in fact, we are non-discriminatory, you're saying, I don't believe you.
Yes, because it's like Mr. Vajpayee is saying that at the end of my career, on the verge of the next election, I'm going to effect this reconciliation at Ayodhya. It's wonderful if this reconciliation is effected, but will we have an apology for December 6th first?
Is the apology necessary?
I think so, because there was vandalism that day. It was not a peaceful removal of a mosque. It was vandalism and killings of the minority all over India.
But if an apology is necessary, why from Mr. Vajpayee?
Well, because he stands for that politics. He stands for the most reasonable
Isn't
side of that
the mistake
politics.
you're making, that you're converting him into a symbol for something that the country as a whole may not necessarily see him as a symbol of?
I don't think that Mr. Vajpayee or Mr. Advani would have come to power in this country without the benefits of that movement. Mr. Advani led that movement, but it was important to have a Mr. Vajpayee
so
at
if
the
they benefited
forefront.
from it, they must also be held accountable for all the lapses of the movement.
What the BJP does today is get the VHP to do its dirty work, whereas Uma Bharti and Murli Manohar Joshi were also there at Ayodhya. They were ministers in this cabinet. So please, let's have a reconciliation after there's due apology for the lives taken.
Apology as a principle and as a step towards reconciliation is very important to you.
I think so.
It's your way of securing justice and
one
closure.
Way. If Mr. Karan Thapa is asking me why I don't take the efforts made by the BJP towards reconciliation today seriously, that's my only condition. That if I believe they were genuine, and this is one way they could be genuine, there may be other ways, but I need to believe...
What makes you think that the use of the word sorry wouldn't be simply tactical? Why would it be sincere?
It may not be, but then they could also tell us that we are not interested in Kashi, Mathura and 2,000 more
So in
mosques.
other words, as a way of proving their legitimacy and their sincerity, you want to hear the word sorry, even if many would suspect that it's not sincerely said.
No, I'm saying a sorry should be accompanied genuinely by also saying that we are not interested in the kind of hate and division politics that the Ayodhya movement caused. We don't want Kashi, we don't want Mathura, we will not go after Baba Baudangari in Karnataka and 2,000 other syncretic shrines which signify Hindu-Muslim worship together. We are interested in genuine reconciliation, in which case we don't believe in the politics of religion.
But the thing is, Ms. Setalvad, that you take, in fact, your critique of the BJP and the Sangh Parivar a lot further than this simple point. When, for instance, you were winning the Rajiv Gandhi Sadbhavna Award, and in your acceptance speech in 2002, again you said of the government, it seeks to use constitutional office for blatantly unconstitutional designs. Now again, many people will turn around and say, she's going far too far.
Can I look at the NCERT textbooks, Karan? I don't have a copy with me. But under this present
What
government...
makes you think that a bad judgment of that nature is in fact unconstitutional?
It's not judgment. It's an executive decision by the HRD.
But what makes it become unconstitutional?
It is unconstitutional because the Constitution speaks of equality and parity and non-discrimination. And the kind of history that is being now taught in the NCERT textbooks is extremely prejudicial and non-equitous. Quite apart from the fact that it might prejudice one community or the other, I think it's denying me my access to a democratic history.
There are historians, you may not agree with them, who believe that in fact this is simply putting the balance right. There are historians who say that we have so far been given a doctrinaire version of Marxist history. We are simply correcting that.
I find this really hilarious because Noam Chomsky has existed all along in America, being the greatest critique of the American state. And we have our great historians like Ramila Thapar and K.N. Panikkar, who are being debunked at home and who have recognition abroad. Now, either we have a regard for excellence, academic excellence and recognition, or we start looking in different terms.
But aren't you widening your ambit of communal defense and opposition to communal violence to take into consideration things that don't really, for most people, fit into it?
I'm sorry. If you look at the work in communalism combat, it has not only limited itself to communal violence. We've looked at the whole issue of textbook writing. We've looked at the question of analysis of history, of enlivening history, and most important, what about the Bhandarkar Institute being vandalized last week? Is it not the same as the Bamyan Buddhas? When you have a 9th century manuscript being destroyed in Indian democracy, is it as bad as the Taliban or not?
But are you going to hold the BJP government responsible personally and demand that they should stand up and apologize for it and say that no reconciliation is possible until the word sorry is used?
Karan, the moment you unleash forces of unreason, and the moment...
But are they? That's the question.
Of course you are.
Mr.
Narendra Modi is the best example of it. Let's leave aside the Bhandarkar Institute. Let's talk about the Chief Minister of Gujarat. I mean, Mr. Narendra Modi has been supported by Mr. Vajpayee and Mr. Advani all through and after the Gujarat carnage. He has not shown a moment's remorse. In fact, he has gloated on it during his election speeches. What about the fact that Mr. Narendra Modi,
despite whatever criticism you make of him, has won an astounding 3/4 majority in an election where the people of Gujarat voted him back with an unprecedented number of seats?
The unprecedented majority in our way of counting votes, 49%.
So now you've suddenly got a problem with the electoral system?
49. No, I'm not. I'm just pointing out facts. Either you want to take the facts or not. 49% of Gujaratis voted against Modi, 51% voted for. This was the same for Mr. Gandhi.
That's a clear majority, something that happens very, very rarely in Indian history.
2%.
In fact, it is probably the only election where more than 51% have voted for the ruling party.
Agreed. That's why it was such a landmark victory. But there's a 2% difference of vote, and yet it got him this overwhelming feats of victory. I feel extremely worried about that 49% of Gujaratis.
Why did you, in 1999...
If you have a pregnant woman, stomach being slit open when she's 9 months pregnant, and a fetus being thrown around, and the BJP, VHP, MLA from Naroda Party are justifying it and egging the men on to rape women.
Would you blame Mr. Vajpayee personally for what happened?
That's the point I'm making. I certainly blame Mr. Togadia and Mr. Modi for that violence. And I certainly blame Mr. Vajpayee and Mr. Advani for condoning it and not creating a complete shock and sense of remorse for what happened in Gujarat.
And you're saying that reconciliation cannot happen until Mr. Vajpayee and Mr. Advani stand up and apologize, accept responsibility and use the word sorry.
Not just the word sorry, but apologize means launch prosecutions, show that they want the guilty punished, show that such violence will not be repeated.
And if I were to say to you that you're probably asking for too much and that as a result you may get nothing at all, would you accept that you're behaving untactically?
No, I think it's our duty to choose our paths and roles. Even if we ask for the moon, I think only if you ask for the moon and your ideology is clear will you get what you want to get.
Why did you in 1999 campaign for the Congress party? Why did you make advertisements for them? Were you not in fact compromising your own credibility and independence?
In fact, that's a very mistaken impression since you've quoted my article so carefully. If you looked at the communalism combat issue of October 99, we took money from 3 political parties. The Congress, CPI and CPM.
Magazines allege that you were in fact operating out of
No,
the
no,
home of a
but I think
Congress
that
MP in Delhi.
since you're asking me, I'm just telling you that we took money from 3 political parties to launch an anti-BJP ad campaign and point out their fascist credentials. It's not something we're ashamed of, because I think this is exactly what they do all the time. We need to be able to expose
You were paying them back with their own coin.
No, I think people don't know about the fact that the Lashkar-e-Toiba hardliner in Pakistan wants a hardline Hindu government because he sees that they're two sides of the same coin. He doesn't want to talk to a secular, progressive government.
You have no qualms about entering the political battle as long as you do so in a cause that you defend and support.
I think principally, on principle, and without sacrificing the fact that we've always said that Congress did 1984 and Congress has not apologized for it either.
Teesta Setalvad, we're going to have to leave it there. A pleasure having you on the program.
Yep, thank you.